Welcome to the Predictable Revenue Podcast, where sales leaders teach you what's working for them so you can build it yourself. Feeling ready to kick your sales into high gear? We're here to help. Check out our sales coaching and consulting services at predictablerevenue.com. Welcome back to the Predictable Revenue Podcast. I'm your host, Colin Stewart. Today, I'm joined by Jorge Gamboa. He's the co-founder of Magellan. We're going to talk about outbound being harder than ever and why old school sales is coming back. Jorge, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Colin.
I'm excited to have you on. I mean, I think I'm hesitating to go into my every outbound channel, every lead gen channel is, following the technology adoption lifecycle curve, because I think I've brought that up in the last 3 or 4 podcasts. Maybe not 3 or out of 4, but in the last 10, it's come up at least 50% of the time. So I won't reiterate that. But I think when you look at outbound, 1, it's certainly effective, even though everybody says it's dying. 2, it's definitely getting harder. And the way I think about it is like the table stakes just keep rising. It used to be like $1, $2 buy-in, and now it's like $20, $50, $20, $40 kind of buy-in. It's a lot harder. You need a bigger chunk to sit down with it, but it still works. That being said, as outbound gets more complicated, other tactics and tools and channels have been coming alive. And we're here to talk with Jorge about one of the things that's been working for him. We're going to talk about kind of why the spray and pray method didn't work. We're going to talk about what you're doing differently. And then we're going to finish by talking about kind of where your first 20 customers came from. So this is going to be a nice mix of kind of how you found your first 20 customers, and then we'll kind of dive really deep into, or some of the tactics that you use, and then we'll kind of dive into like where the first 20 of them came from.
Yep, for sure.
Yeah. Awesome, man. Tell me about, let's talk about the pain. Why does selling suck today?
Well, I think there's 2 reasons. I think selling has always sucked. It's always a challenge, right? Which is why you get paid a lot of money if you're good at it, right? Mm-hmm. You don't get paid at things that are easy, right? Those are the jobs that just don't pay very well. So I think there's like an inherent, it's always been a challenging thing. But I think the reason that it's really painful and scary today is the same methods that we, like, at least I used as an SDR namely, and we were literally following the predictable revenue playbook. Like my leader had literally read the book, recommended it to me for reading. And we had someone who was creating those cadences and those sequences that we were all using the same exact one. We were putting, and I forget the numbers now because it's been 8 years, but like at least 100 leads a day, if not more, in these sequences, locking them and loading them, firing them off, putting people who'd already been there. Like, and I just, no shit on you, this is definitely not the gold standard of your system. This is our, recent sales reps interpretation with fear of quota. So I don't want to say that this is what you recommend or what you guys do. It's not at all, but that's what we did. And
it's what we did 8 years ago. Like, no judgment of something that 8 years ago. Man, 12 years ago, I was doing the exact same thing, but I was putting 50 people into yet another mail merge, a Google sheet with yet another mail merge. And then I had a bunch of filters and labels. And like, it was all extremely generic messaging because like Gmail back then, 12 years ago, was extremely clunky and slow to use compared to, what it is now. So no judgment on something that happened 8 years ago. Like, things have evolved, and, looking back with today's knowledge and judging something that happened 8 years ago is like a bit silly. So
100%.
If it worked, it worked,
And that's what I will say. It worked very effectively at that time. And I think the reason that it isn't working anymore is twofold. One, our prospects are just adjusting to the new reality. Like, my name, the company is no longer this like unique, tailored, personalized experience. It's a sales rep putting these custom variables in the system, just fitting in the data. And and by the way, we've been using the same tactics for years and years and years now. So now they become attuned to it. And now it's just the new spam. Like, what were you going to say?
Were you all using the alligator in your office breakup email?
We were using, did you fall off, get lost in the safari and get caught by an alligator? So an adaptation of the alligator. Yeah. But yes, we had a GIF with an alligator attacking a human for sure.
I kind of miss those days. It was funnier, there was a little bit more room for creativity, at least in that particular email. It was funny. I feel like we've kind of lost that a little bit.
So what I would actually say is that there's always room for creativity in sales. Like even to this day, I think, but it has to come from a place of authenticity and match your personality. So like what I would find funny, some people would find cringy. And okay, like no shade, like everyone has their own like style and their own tone, but I'm telling you, it works for me. I book a ton of meetings, but it's because I follow up with it with a lot of confidence because that's my style. But it's tough to follow in the steps of someone else with the same confidence and bravado because you have this sense of like imposter.
It's also really challenging to scale up being funny at scale to, I don't know, how many people are you going to send this template to? Thousands of people, right? Like even comedians wouldn't do that. Like professional comedians wouldn't do that on an untested joke. So
correct. You got to test.
That's really tricky and risky. You got to be very confident or cavalier about it.
And I think I probably fall into cavalier. Just like you got to,
I've done the same.
Live, just go.
100%. Oh yeah, I've had some absolute bombs of sequences because I'm like, this is the best one. Oh, I think this is really funny. Like 3 people email back and be like, that's hilarious. And like 80 people are pissed off. Like, that's not a great ratio. So I probably have a similar sense of humor to you. Like it's very niche. If you appreciate it, you appreciate it.
And I think that's something that can be easy to forget as you get more experience in sales. At least for me, what I mean is that like I've kind of discovered these tricks through trial and error. Like this sort of wording, this sort of like what's the content that I can find on this person's company that's going to resonate? And it's sort of like this pattern recognition. And I go, oh, like that, like A works, B works, C works, but it's because F, D, like all fail. And I'm sort of like recording it in my head. And then, you talk to a new salesperson and you're like, that's wrong. And like, what do you mean? And it's because they don't have the like, oh, I've been doing this for 10 years and I'm filing away. This is what works with people. Like, because I guess to try to make it a little bit less abstract and more concrete, like I feel that sales is about psychology and human nature. And that's why it's this evergreen career. Like we like to buy, especially if it's a big ticket item, which I would say big tickets, like anything that's like 20 grand plus. Like we like to talk to a person and be like, look, this is what I want. This is what the problem I'm trying to solve. You who are the expert in your product, like, can you help me see if this is the right fit? And the same is true of like starting a conversation with someone. We're using this human nature and psychology to appear to be an expert, appear to be personable, and not some scam artist or someone that make it worth their time to actually engage with us. And that's what I have, and I'm sure every salesperson has over a career, filing away of like, okay, like this sort of wording, this sort of language, these sort of career accolades or whatever it might be that we use to get their attention work on a higher ratio than the other tactics.
100%. I think we've spent the last, it's an arms race is maybe not the right analogy, but I think as, we're all fishing in the same pond, and as other fishermen move in, you're trying to find that edge. You're trying to find the tackle, the bait that has just like a little bit better. You're trying to find that magical spot where, the fish are going to bite more frequently than elsewhere. And I think we've gone from like a bunch of people just like fishing in a small pond to like now there's like folks with like boats and nets and like there are professionals and there's machinery getting involved. And like it's, I think when you are, the sole fisherman and you're sending personalized messages, it still works. It still stands out. And I wouldn't say this and wouldn't be so confident in saying this if I hadn't prospected in the last couple of weeks and sent like a 1-to-1 email. I sent a bunch and then I was like, oh, I think I can actually merge this one. And I bought yet another mail merge again.
Back at it.
Even though I probably still have like the code from in a sheet somewhere. But I was like, I'm going to send 100 of the same emails. I was like, I think I found the template. A nice personalized and personally like relevant. The reason this like mass, air quotes mass to 62 people worked was like, I did a lot of work to like really narrow in on the right list. And I'm like, this message will resonate with this audience. I feel that's a little bit lost to SDRs that work when you were at Namely, you're in the machine, right? You're just on the deckhand on a boat. You're not steering the boat. You're not, baiting lines. You're not whatever. You're just like pulling rope and helping the machine run. I think you don't learn quite as much when you're on the boat as opposed to when you're just the guy standing on the shore fishing.
And I think you learn different skill sets. Like you're going to be really good at pulling that rope and your muscles are going to be jacked. And if someone says pull rope, you're going to be the top rope puller. But yes, it's like a very different muscles and skill sets if you're the only guy, on the shore, just luring it up and then trying to catch something. And we're talking about, emails that can be sent at scale. Like in my sequences, in my process, I always have a fallback email because there's like one thing I learned is, and this is actually from Morgan Ingram, like if you can't find good content on the person in the company, they deserve a bad email. Like if you're doing the work to try to find it, to try to personalize, then have zero doubts about sending a crappy email because what are you supposed to do, right? Like there's only so much we can do. And so I always have these like fallback emails and that I'm constantly playing A/B testing. And I remember one time I was selling to chiefs of staff and like that boilerplate email was like, hail to the chief, right? Because like chiefs of staff tend to be people who are like a little bit brainy. They're a little bit nerdy. Like they probably are a little bit more politically savvy. And like that worked really well. And so that would be my, okay, I can't find a gem that's really going to resonate with this person. And that works. And yeah, I probably do send that to like, over a course of a month, like 60, 80, 100 people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's great to have that kind of fallback.
Yeah, you have to.
100%. I do think there can be a time and a place for some automation. But again, like I automated 60, 80 over a course of a week. And like the amount of time that went into picking the list was like, I know exactly the message that's going to like resonate with these 80 folks. And I had probably a 20 or 30% response rate. And like,
it's insanely good.
It's insanely good. It's basically a handwritten email, hand typed, whatever, but the targeting was extremely relevant. The problem is it's really hard to get good targeting like that in the Apollo, not to pick on Apollo. I like the tool. I like having all my data in there with my sequencer. I think there's some magical things that you can do when the two play together. But like, if you're just building off of like a couple of Apollo filters, that's what everybody else that's fishing into your pond. Those are the same filters. Those are the same tackle. Those are the same lines that they're all using. I like to add in other things to try and find that alpha of like, where can I be a little bit better than all of my competitors? And when I found this list, I'm like, oh yeah, this is perfect. I'm going to change X, Y, and Z and kind of do the normal things. But I'm like, if you could kind of draw a circle and say, if I was looking at each one of these individuals, would I send them the exact same email? And I'm like, okay, cool. I'm good to automate that. And so, yeah, that's always been my kind of thesis on like, I'm trying to design a campaign. I'm trying to build a sequence. I'm trying to write some messaging for something. Would I draw a circle around these names and say, okay, I'm going to send them the exact same message, and will it resonate and be effective? Because I've been lazy and been like, yeah, let's draw a big circle and it'll probably resonate with these 1,000 folks. And it used to back in the day. Yeah, 10 years ago, 8 years ago, it worked extremely well. Now you got to draw much smaller and smaller circles and kind of be a lot more thoughtful about like, how are we crafting these campaigns and writing the messaging?
Yeah. And I think going back to that analogy of the fisherman, like there's like two ways I think to fight in this economy. It's like, yeah, you can get like a bigger net and a bigger boat and just go for scale, or you kind of niche down, right? Like, what is the tool that's going to help me capture this type of fish, right? And I think right now we're seeing, from my perspective, we're seeing the limits of the like bigger boat, bigger fish, because prospects are just sick and tired of it. And this leads to the second part. And so like Gmail and Outlook are also trying to stop that and reduce that, because now like email itself is becoming less effective because it's just so bombarded with junk that like email has gotten so bombarded with junk that Slack is essentially like, don't waste your time in email. Just message with people who should be accessing you and interrupting you. And obviously it's like building culture and it adds more value.
Slack's been saying that for 10 years though, or 9 years, whenever, like since they launched, like that's been their like, don't waste your time in email. And like, I agree with you that email has is less effective today than it was last year or 2 years ago, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't think this is anything new. Like, I think if you look at the dips in overall average reply rates, the biggest dips came from like the first time Google implemented TensorFlow, which was like 2018, 2019. And then that's when like in my opinion, that's when the templated like email with, a little bit of personalization or like no personalization. When I say like a little bit, I mean like first name, company kind of personalization.
Yeah, the variables.
That type of prospecting took a big hit.
Okay.
And then you had to do things differently with deliverability. And then they've changed kind of like what matters. And in those days, and I think what still holds is that it's all about engagement. If you're getting really great reply rates, you can break all of the rules. It's insane. I've seen companies that send 10, 20, 30 emails and get like flagged as spam. I see companies, I had one customer who was sending like 800 emails a day from his Gmail.
Wow.
And like no deliverability problems, like great open rates, but he had insane reply rates. And so like, I think at the heart of it, it's all engagement. Now, I agree with you. It's harder today, but I think the line has been like slowly getting harder and harder and harder. I don't think haven't noticed any like absolute massive drop-offs. I think this summer there was a couple of blips, but they always kind of tend to even out. I don't think Gmail really wants to get rid of cold email.
Oh, absolutely not. You can't destroy a B2B industry, which is what you would do if you eliminate email.
If you eliminated cold email where two people had never talked before, you're going to eliminate anybody reaching out to buy anything, anybody reaching out to make a connection. You're going to like, there is value in that. And I think that traffic is really hard to sniff out compared to like a well-written cold email.
100%. I mean, Microsoft makes most of its money from selling its software to businesses selling to other businesses. Like if it were to kill cold email, it's eventually killing itself, the slow death. So I don't mean to say that, they're trying to eliminate this channel entirely. Absolutely not. It's just, they're trying to, I think, channel behavior in a different way so that it's like, to your point, like rewarding engagement. Like, are you sending stuff that people actually care about, actually want? Keep sending it. But I think if we're honest with ourselves, what I sent 8 years ago, was that the stuff that gets high levels of engagement that people want and are asking for? The answer is no, which is why, but at the same time, was that, a fast growing, like leading sales team in New York tech? Yes. And so that like we were sort of promoting, like, this is what success looks like. This is what good looks like. Everyone starts imitating. And I doubt namely was first. And that's not what I'm trying to communicate. Like, I'm sure it's happening across the board. And now we're seeing sort of the consequences of that. And people are trying to run a similar playbook. And why isn't it working? And it's like, well, that's because it's being shut down. That playbook.
I would also argue that 8 years ago, like namely was fairly well known, had a lot of momentum, right?
Yes.
People were talking about it. And I think that positive word of mouth covers a lot of ground and lifts the numbers and the metrics of any demand gen channel that's going after it. I have a theory that's going to be in my next book where it's and what we've noticed over the last kind of 12 years, helping companies build their first customer acquisition channel. Your product market fit is not binary. It exists on a scale, and it can go from I don't want to say negative, but like it could be a fraction of 1, or it could be like 2 or 3, and it acts as a multiplier of your revenue efforts. So say you got a 10 out of 10 revenue team, right? You're getting 100% efficiency out of your revenue team, but you've got really crappy product market fit. That's like 0.2 times 10, right? You're going to get 20% of the output of that team. If you've got strong product market fit, it's 1. If you got extreme product market fit, it might be 2 or 3. And I think if you look back at where Namely was, you were probably above 1, maybe in the 2 to 3 range. Like, we've seen some absolutely crazy customers come in with us, and we run side-by-side campaigns, and like they're getting 2 to 3 to 5x. We had one that got 33x better than the benchmark in their email campaigns. It was it like broke all our numbers. It's like, holy shit. That was the kind of customer that led us to product market fit is a multiplier of demand gen efforts. And
100%.
so I'd argue that back when you were at Namely, you were doing things that probably you could have been doing better. Anybody could have been doing better. You could say that about anything we've ever done. Anyway, but I think if another company that didn't have such strong product market fit had tried that, I bet you it wouldn't have worked as well. I guarantee it wouldn't have worked as well.
That's totally fair. And I believe that. Yeah.
we've been doing this podcast for a while, and I'd have people on and be like, hey, teach me something in cold email or teach me something in sales. And I would try these things. And what took me off to it is a guy we actually hired. He works for us now, Jake Biscar. He was one of our first 20 or 30 podcasts. He was at Rainforest QA at the time. And we were talking about this like personalization trick that he was using. And it was a really cool system. He's like a really great systems thinker. And I tried one of the tactics that was working for Rainforest QA on another customer of ours, and it totally flopped. And like, this was the thing that was getting them like 20% reply rates. And I tried it with a customer in a different industry with a different product, and they got like nil. And I was like,
And so from your perspective, what was the big difference? Was it like the persona? Was it the industry?
I mean, I think first it's got to be the company and the product that you're representing, right? Like that's the big one. And then it's the industry, and is this tactic suitable for the industry? And then is this audience kind of receptive to cold email in this way? It also could have been the messaging. Like we could have just totally taken Jake's tactic and absolutely butchered it and got it wrong. We could have had terrible core messaging. The targeting could have been bad. But when you isolate for all those variables, like we've ran, if you look on our YouTube channel, we used to do outbound labs. We ran a bunch of experiments. And the reason we stopped doing that is we found it hard to replicate learnings across companies. And where we landed was like, there's nothing in outbound. There's going to be things that are true directionally, but there's nothing that you're going to get to a level of statistical significance that you're going to publish it in science, you know?
Oh, no, absolutely not.
And obviously,
it's just so hard to do. Like, there's so many restrictions on a scientific study. Like, and I think that's the beauty of sales is that, like, for me, a sales experiment, especially on like a one-on-one rep basis, like should only have to like by 7 days, you should have a sense of this is substantially better or not. Like, I'm not looking for that like 1%, 2% better. It's I'm looking for something that got me a couple more meetings, and now like this is my new way of doing something versus on the edges it was a little bit better.
Totally. And what we found was that it was really challenging to replicate, even when we had something that worked across clients. We had 2 clients that, and I apologize to listeners, I've told the story 1,000 times, so it'll be really quick. 2 clients, competitors. They were both resellers of a particular type of software. The founders were both buddies. Okay. And one referred the other one to come work with us. So they're selling the exact same thing, and they each had their own state, and then they had a crossover state that they sold into. Mm-hmm. And company A was killing it, and company B was the new company that was referred into us. And the guy shared all of our documents, everything, all the messaging, all the lists, everything that we had shared with his competitor. And his competitor showed up to the call, was like, hey, so-and-so said I could use this. And we did. And it did terribly. Look, the only thing that changed was the domain that it was coming from. Same list, same targeting. And sometimes it was the same list, sometimes it was a different list, but it was like the same geography. It was the same targeting, different people. And one was getting like good to really good response rates, and the other one was like, there's a problem here.
That's insanity, because and you have way more experience in this field than I do, but I always came from, well, at least when it comes to setting up meetings, right? Because down the funnel product is so important, but in my mind, setting up meetings is a lot more about the industry, like in industry persona, and then the channels that resonate. Because I feel that at the beginning, making something sound interesting shouldn't be that hard. Like, that's what sales is, right? Like, the point is, do I trust that you're actually like, you can follow through on that really interesting thing you're saying? And that's where closing's, super, super challenging. But just setting up a meeting, to me, like, I would come at it from a different lens of actually just tell me the industry, tell me the persona, and that's what's going to determine my success versus my product. That's what's going to determine the success to close, because I can say it's going to slice it and dice it in a million ways, And then, it's all like fluff, or then I show you the million ways and it's like, dude, I don't want to do that. Like I had a different image in my mind with what the reality of your product is. And I'm not interested in that. So it's funny how we can like approach it from different lenses.
100%. I've been helping companies outsource their sales development and coach them on how to build SDR teams for 12, 13 years now. And so like, I've had a chance to see, and I'm like, what do some of our customers get extreme value out of it, and others, it's a total flop. And I think it comes down to how much does the market want or need your product? And I think there was a period there where there was a lot of capital running free. And there were a lot of companies that were, I would say, had softer product market fit, and others had stronger. And the ones that had stronger product market fit were the best customers, the best and the worst customers, because they were the best. Everything would work really well. We'd have them prove it out, and they're like, cool, thanks. We just hired, 10 SDRs. Good luck.
Cool.
Yeah. But it all came down to like, is your product a must-have? Do you know how to articulate that?
And I think, the must-have versus nice-to-have, that's like very, very important for your first customers. We talked about finding product market fit, and I, before starting Magellan, was like, oh, this is like, it's binary. And like you said, it's not at all. And even within the search to get there, like, we talked about it being on a spectrum. I think it's like a spectrum is a bit of a step ladder of characteristics that define entry and exit criteria for how far along you are from like, is your idea even good? Right. Which is step one in starting a company. Like, you need the idea on its face in 1 to 2 sentences should be interesting before you even get into like, how does it work? Why? Because you're only gonna have 1 to 2 sentences to try to get someone to like your product. So if you can't distill it down to 1 or 2 sentences, like, it's just gonna be like, it's not impossible. It's gonna be very challenging to get that company off the ground. So like, that's like step one on the product market fit spectrum. Step two is then, do you have a product, right? Which like it's a whole challenge of like building it, But let's say, okay, we've got something that's compelling in 1 to 2 sentences. We've got a product. Then it's, can your product deliver the value that it's promising, right? And if the answer is yes, like, that's when you start getting to that coefficient. Okay, like, yes to a client, but to how many out of a sample size of 10 or 100, right? Obviously, that product market fit. You don't need to get 100 to be a product market fit, by the way. Like, that would be insane. That would be like, Mom, like, we're rich, we've made it. Like, you don't have to work a day in your life. So product market fit isn't a 1-to-1 ratio, which is, I think, what I didn't realize when I started this, right? And getting past every iteration is such a challenge. But I think as it relates to like first 20 customers, in the beginning, it's I think one thing, if I could go in a time machine and give myself advice, it would be, don't be in such a rush to go to market. Like, I think in tech, you've got to build, and you should have built yesterday, so you got to go. And I think that presumes that you know what to build. And the truth is, at least as an early stage founder and as a first time founder, I did, but I really didn't. Like, in hindsight, like I had to really get punched in the face by the market telling me, you've got the cool idea part, but you haven't built the product part. And you give it to someone, you put it in their hands, and then they keep punching you in the face. And in the beginning, it can feel unfair. It could be like, no, but like, isn't this better than nothing? And it's like, not really. Like, like, sort of, but like, I'm not paying you for like a 5% improvement. But yeah.
Exactly. And if you think about like doing nothing is great, right? Like, I got a big monitor sitting in front of me, and sometimes I'll check my email on my phone because like, I don't want to change my sitting position. I'm like, if I'm that lazy, doing nothing to doing something for like a moderate gain in efficiency or a moderate gain in whatever, I've got to, especially in a B2B context, I've got to find a person to manage it. I've got to buy the stuff. I got to go through that process. I got to go through implementation. Like, even if your product is free, it's still going to cost me thousands of dollars. So that's a high hurdle. And like,
100%.
I don't know, there's so many founders out there that are doing like this, but a little bit better. It's like, it's got to be 10x better than what's currently there in order to get me off my lazy ass. Put my feet down, face my keyboard, and be like, all right, this is worth paying attention to.
Yeah, 110%. And I think that's something that we talk about. Like it's got to be 10x. But like, what does that look like, and what's the process to get there? And I think where it's easy as a first-time founder to get trapped is, I've got to get to 10x. This isn't 10x. I've got to keep building. I've got to keep building. I've got to keep building. And for me, at least in my experience, the reality is like, it's not 10x, but you need to give it to somebody and they need to tell you where you need to, like, what's wrong with it to get it to 10x. So it's like, even though you know it's not 10x better, you have to get real client experience. Like, and so what I mean, like, let's
you can't build it all in a box in a vacuum.
Yeah, because they're going to tell you the parts that I'm trying, like, basically I'm trying to, like, for me, so I'm building sales software and I'm a sales guy, and so I'm building for myself, but I'm not every seller, right? Like, the way, like, just this conversation, you came from it from a framework of, actually the product is by far the most important thing you're selling. And my frame is, at least for meetings, not closings, is actually industry and persona are going to determine the tactics. And the truth is probably somewhere in the middle, right? Like, it's the truth is that everything is so complex and difficult and challenging. And yeah, and I think the process to getting to product market fit is one of knowing you're not at 10x, but then having a client tell you what it is you need to build to get there to 10x.
100%. The biggest killer of companies is premature scale. And that's two things. It's a bunch of things, but it's over-investing in go-to-market before your revenue is going to be, or your product market fit is strong enough to return, to provide a real return on your revenue investments. And the other side of it is overbuilding the product before you know exactly what you need to build. I mean, there's a bunch of other things, but I think those are the two biggest things that I've seen. And it's hard when you go from like, I've got this idea, I found this gap, and then everybody's like, just go sell it. You're like, well, there's this kind of middle ground where you need to both learn and sell. And I used to think they were two separate processes, right? It's customer development over here, it's learning, it's building, and it's kind of this like build, measure, learn loop that we would read about in the lean startup. And then over here, everybody's like, just go sell, just go sell, just go sell. And then you're like, are you sure? And they're like, just go sell. And so you take this like half-formed product and you take it to market, and then you move into like a full sales motion when it's half ready. One is going to be less efficient. And then two, you run the risk of kind of over-representing what your product is when you move into a full sales position and say, like, this thing is fully baked, it's going to do all these great things, as opposed to like in the customer development process, it's, hey, I'm here to learn. By the way, do you want to check it out? We've got something. It's not ready yet, but if you're in pain and you're okay using something that's half built, we could probably trade some money for it. And I think where I differ with like from everybody who talks about customer development is like, I believe you can and should sell as part of your customer development process. And I think that is that's where your early customers are going to come from. But trying to find that and trying to walk that line in this kind of like middle section where you got to be doing both, that's a really hard line to walk.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's a hard line to walk, but it's crucial. And what I would recommend to founders is, you still, even if it's half baked and you want to represent it as half baked, you need to be charging for it. Because a line that I like to say is, if they don't like your product when it's ugly, if not willing to pay for your product while it's ugly, like putting UI UX is not going to help, right? The problem you're solving should be like potent enough that if they see a janky Google sheet that does this little thing, they're going to go, yeah, like I'll give you $20-$30, right? It doesn't have to be a massive, like $200-$300 license like per user contract, but they should be giving you some cash to prove that they've got skin in the game. Now, maybe at the very, very beginning, if it's like really, really, but I would say as soon as you can, ask for money, because sure, like who doesn't want to just like, especially with tech, like who doesn't want to play around with a new toy for free? But you want someone who's going to say, hey, like I see value in this and I'm going to give you a little bit of money, even if it's just, $10 a month, $20 a month, well, not that ton of money.
100%. If they're going to change their process, if they're going to change anything and actually implement it, the majority of the cost is going to be on their side anyway. So
correct.
$100 a month for something that's going to provide them with a couple $1,000s a month in value is nothing. I love your point about the demo. Like when I was selling carb, we went like 0 to $1 million in a couple of months. And I remember somebody asking me, they're like, oh, can you walk me through like this part of it? And I was like, if we're able to deliver the value that we've talked about today, doesn't matter what color it is. I was like, because once you implement it, you're going to see very quickly, like within 20 minutes of like, is it producing the value that Colin promised? And if it is, you'll keep using it. If it's not, save you the time. I was like, so I could walk you through the whole thing. And the person's like, no, good point. Like, I was like, it's going to be ugly. This is where it's going to suck. This is where it's going to be awesome. They're like, yeah, let's give it a try. And like when we were selling carb, I think we started we did it all manually and it was $500 a month to start. Like there was no free, hey, check it out, blah, 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 blah.
So when you say we did it all manually, what do you mean?
Oh, when I was testing out like, hey, before we even built a product for carb, we did a manual like Wizard of Oz style beta.
Yeah. Mechanical Turk. Okay, yeah. Okay, gotcha.
Exactly. And I was like, I'll do this for you for $500 a month with janky sheets and yet another merge. And I think we were using like Jigsaw. I think we did that before it shut down. It was basically a communal address book where think of Apollo, right? And then think of, okay, say I want 100 email credits. I want to download 100 emails. You can either pay for email credits or you can upload 100 contacts from and get
clever. And then and we add to the database and it starts growing and growing and growing. Kind of like Glassdoor, where it's like you leave a review and you can access all the reviews. And then that's cool. Okay, cool.
Exactly. And so that got bought by Salesforce, and then Salesforce shut it down for like data privacy reasons. Because it all came from like people uploading other people's contacts. And I was kind of sad about it, but I think in hindsight, you could kind of see why they didn't want that risk. But it was a fantastic product anyway.
But what you just mentioned is what I would recommend every entrepreneur start with. Like, do it manually so that you can figure out what works, what doesn't, where are the pain points, what is the part that you want to automate. And yeah, that's a great way to start.
When you were getting started, what was your Mechanical Turk version?
Well, I had 2 different lives to Magellan, and I think one has been more successful than the other. And so one's a really good example of what not to do, which honestly is like happy to share. And one is I think of what to do. And so I said this to you because which story would you like to hear?
So what I like not to do,
like what not to do. I think, my first version was this like meeting software that it was like not for sales meetings. It was just collaboration, right? Like, right, we just had a brainstorming meeting, or we just had a team meeting, and tasks have been delegated. We're going to do something. And then a week later, it's like, okay, what happened? And everyone's like, oh, I don't know. Like, I didn't, things happened. Okay. Like next week, we're like really, really going to get it. And it kept like these deadlines kept getting pushed back until finally it'd be like 30 days after we wanted. And we're like fighting, pulling hair. And I was just like, from my perspective, for a little background on me, like I was a former lawyer. And what that means is I was like, I can be detail oriented. It's not, I don't like it, which is why I'm no longer in the law, but having had that experience, like I can force myself to get there. And I was able to recognize, look, if we just take detailed notes, if we just record who's doing what, who's committed to what, if we remind them, we're going to have better success. So and now this is like so common and so popular. So I would go into the meetings and I would be like that phantom recorder, or like that Zoom recorder. And I was doing this, and this is like pre-AI. And so I was doing that, and I'm sending the notes, I'm sending the assignments, and I wanted this to work. And I actually got the client to like pay me to do this And I was like, well, someone's not going to pay me unless they're getting value from it. But I think if I was listening to that little voice inside myself, it was like, I'm not really delivering a ton of value. Like they like the notes, they like the tasks, but over the 3 months that I worked with them as a mechanical Turk, it wasn't like, oh my God, Jorge, we've like doubled productivity. It was sort of like, you're reminding us of what we haven't done and what we're not doing. And you're reminding us that we're, yeah, like, and they wouldn't have said this. This is my interpretation of it, just because I didn't see tasks spike and increase in productivity. But I took their like willingness to let me continue to participate and their willingness to pay for this, not ungodly sums, but money, as like, there's something to it. And honestly, like I don't know what the truth sum is for them, but having done this enough time, like the reaction of someone using Mechanical Turk should be really exciting, not just like, see you next week. Like, can't wait. They should be like, wow, like this is incredible, especially in the beginning, right? Because it's yeah. So because it would market with time, like competitors are going to come up, and you're like cool newfangled thing is going to become the like this is what everyone's doing. So in the beginning, it should really be like mind alteringly good.
Yeah, I mean the definition of like Mark Andreessen's definition of product market fit is the customer's literally pulling the product out of you, right? And so in this case, they're not pulling it. They're like, okay, we'll have the product, but they're not reaching forward. They're sitting back on the demos. You're telling them about it, and they're not like leaning forward. You're like, oh my God, we have to have this. Like when I first launched the service that turned into predictable revenue, I was like, hey, I'm thinking of starting this thing where I'll just be an SDR for you for $500 a month. I was like, just to see if I can produce any value. No commitments, no guarantees, whatever. I'll do like this many contacts and I'll send this many emails and we'll see what happens. And I was like, I think I could handle 5. And I had 5 meetings and 2 of the people, everybody bought, and 2 of the people bullied me into taking their friend. And I was like, oh, I went from, we were stuck on like our previous version of the company was like stuck at $1,600 in MRR.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And in a week, I added $3,500.
So what was the change for your business model?
The previous iteration was a CRM company that nobody wanted to buy. I was just trying to sell like another. I mean, we had a bunch of different angles that we tried and tested. But the core problem with my first company, Voltage CRM, was I did customer development. I won't call it development. I did customer validation, where I had these ideas sketched up and I went, look at my cool ideas. What do you think about my cool ideas? And people were like, yeah, looks cool. Seems like a really smart idea. And then we built that idea and I came back and I was like, hey, remember that thing you said was really cool, really smart? You want to buy it? And they're like, no, I'd never buy that. Fuck. Classic. And so this was I finally got my head out of my ass and I was breathing fresh air for the first time in 2 years and was listening to people. And what I heard was, when I thought back to all the interviews, nobody wanted another CRM, but they acknowledged that there was a sales productivity problem.
Yeah.
And when I started doing more interviews, I had a suspicion that it was people with sales development reps because they had a higher volume of tasks that they had to do in Salesforce. And so when I went to my 5 buddies, I was like, hey, are you struggling with this? Everybody's like, hell yeah. And so like 5 meetings turned into 7 customers. And like, that was literally the pull because I had found a pain that everybody's like, dude, my SDRs are prospecting 5 folks every day because it takes so long to find the data, to write the emails, to update it in Salesforce. Because like back 13 years ago, SDRs were manually typing everything into Salesforce. Like I said, let me add a contact, let me add an account, let me draft the email, let me send it in Gmail, let me copy paste it into Outlook, into Salesforce, let me add the note, let me like create a task to follow up. Like it was, and Salesforce was much different back then, and your Internet Explorer or Chrome was much slower, and yada yada yada, the good old days.
Yeah.
So
that's
I think that's why when we made that switch, it was suddenly like the floodgates were opening up, at least compared to like walking through the desert and everybody being like, no thanks.
100%. And I think so, transitioning from the like that was the failed one to the more successful one is, yeah, like you said, in the failed version of Magellan, it's like, okay, I did the Mechanical Turk. They like paid for it. They're delivering value. So let me start building it. And there's like so much internal doubt. And as I'm building it, I'm sort of saying, okay, like people don't want this unpolished version. Like, let me keep building it, better UI, better polish, and into the point where it's like you said, that cool thing that you wanted to build, which I did that validation too. Here it's built, and then suddenly no one gives a flying. Um, well, in the other iteration, it's like from the get-go, I'm showing them, like I didn't do a full Mechanical Turk because then I transitioned to a sales tool, which like I had a sales background. So I knew how the systems worked. Like I knew how, like where I wanted us to fit within the tech stack. And so what I did was just create like a Google Sheet on steroids and showed it to them. And people were like, oh my God, I want this. Gave them access to it. And then get their feedback, right? Like, what is it that they don't like? What is it? And then just keep building, keep building, keep building. And once we got to the point where people were using that Google Sheet on a daily basis and getting value from it, that was the point when I realized, okay, now we got to build software. Because then it was like we were reaching the limits of what Google Sheet was capable of. And the answer was like, oh, well, if we had our own web application, this wouldn't be a problem, but because we have Google Sheet. But at this point, it's like, okay, it's not about like that cool idea and drawing that's going to do these all wonderful things. It's this janky product that is doing that thing, and they just want to get more value from it. Okay, now it's time to start like if I like the analogy I like to use is like the blueprint. Like, okay, now we have the blueprint. Now it's time to really start building that house. Like we used like a Lego set, and now we got to start digging the foundation, pouring the concrete, putting the timbers up, and start really building it because we know, based off of user feedback and experience, there's value, there's demand here. Yeah, and that's been a lot better.
How many people did you have using that janky sheet?
At its peak, I think we had like 30 people.
Nice.
Yeah.
And where did those 30 folks come from? Like friends, family, cousins?
I would say like a third were colleagues, right? Like people who had like worked with me at Namely. Shout out. Like, by the way, as much as we're ragging on our sales process, my time there was absolutely wonderful. And so, namely, the Namely family came through, C-Flow at Benny, Nick Rossamini at Ubiquity, Nolan Jordan. And so they were like early adopters, gave it to their reps, gave it to their teams. But then I would say outbound, like, I was using my own tool. And so, yeah, outbound was the rest of the 2/3.
Gotcha. I'm curious, from the first users and from the, those first 20, how many of them have been referrals from, like early users?
Yeah. So in the beginning, none, because the process was bad. But most recently, I'd say for every one activated client that's excited, we get like 2 referrals.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
My experience with Carb was very similar. It was every customer we activated, we would get, I can't remember the exact number, but more than one, could have been 2 to 3. And what we noticed was when we were ahead and things were going really well, like it was like 4 or 5, everybody'd be like, man, all my buddies got to check this out. And then when we started having some issues on the basically sending the email side, servers got bogged down, all those referrals went away. And I think that was the indication to me that like the referral coefficient, like the percentage of your customers that are sending you referrals is a strong signal of product market fit.
Totally. And I think, word of mouth is how you grow a business. Like you can't outbound and market your way toward it. It's, every client that we close is going to say, hey, this is great. Joe, you should check this out. Jane, you should check this out. And how many people they tell, I think that's a strong indicator of where you fit in the marketplace.
100%. It comes down to that like 10x. Is it 10x better than, doing what we were doing before? I'm curious, kind of zooming in on Magellan. What is Magellan 10x better than?
Yeah. So where we are 10x better is for like SMB sales teams. And what I'm trying to do is fix the problem that I feel like these sales enablement platforms have created, with the ability to send like 100 generic emails. So the way like I view the problem is, okay, we can keep adding hundreds of generic leads to these sequences that are, quote unquote tailored, title, name, all that good stuff. Or we know what the answer is. It's like, do your homework, look at the prospect, look at their company, craft something that's really relevant, and explain like why your product is super timely. That's extremely time consuming. So that's going to take you 15 minutes on average. And honestly, it can take a lot longer. And so what we're doing is we're accelerating the rate at which people can do that. So you add your leads to the sequence, and we now like integrate with HubSpot, Outreach, SalesLoft, Salesforce, and we're automatically pulling those leads in. We are scraping their LinkedIn pages, we are scraping their companies, and we're scraping the top news articles on their companies as it relates to their role. And what we do is we process that data and we say, look, I'm trying to start a conversation with Colin. Like, what do you think is going to get that going? We create 2 highly tailored emails, a LinkedIn connection request. You can like then leverage these in your cold calls. But now you're starting with a personalized outreach campaign that's soup to nuts. And we're giving you the data that we found to create it. And you are acting as an editor all within your existing sales tools. And now it's going to take you 2 to 3 minutes. So we're not at the stage, and I don't think we'll get there in the next year or 2 of a set it and forget it, just because the process isn't perfect, right? Like there's going to be random kinks that we can kind of get into, but now you're staring at a fully draft process, and you're using your judgment to refine it, and that takes like 2, 3, maybe 5 minutes if you're really cranking it out. But it's a lot better than having to hunt.
If people are listening, they want to check it out, where's the best place for them to look?
Yeah, for sure. Our website is meet, as in like meeting, Magellan.co. So no M.co.
Meet Magellan.co.
Magellan.co. Yeah.
I will throw a link in the show notes. So go check it out there. If people are looking to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to reach out?
Yeah, for sure. LinkedIn, I'm super active. It's just Jorge Gamboa, and it's going to be Magellan. If you found someone who worked at Namely or went to BC in Northwestern Law, you found the right guy. Also email, and that's just Jorge at meetmagellan.co.
Perfect. I'll throw those in the show notes. Jorge, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, and it was a pleasure.
You bet. Thanks to everybody for listening. We'll see you all next week.